Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running, State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week, we're talking to a marathon star who checks all those boxes, truly, from smartest to fastest. We're also happy to say he's becoming the first guest to make a return appearance, a second appearance on this podcast, Running State of the Sport.
Amby's talking about Jared Ward, the great runner from Utah and Brigham Young University, who placed sixth in the 2016 Rio Olympic Marathon and has served as a mentor to all the top BYU alumni we've come to know in recent years. Jared himself returned to near top form this spring with a PR 46:49 in the Cherry Blossom 10-miler and a 2:15 marathon in Pittsburgh, despite having some hamstring issues. But before we chat with Jared, let's look at some of the biggest running news that's been going on. Amby, what have you been paying attention to?
I was mainly this weekend looking at the Cape Town Marathon, which was interesting in a few regards to me. First, this year it actually happened. You may remember, and listeners may remember, that a year ago the Cape Town Marathon was canceled just 90 minutes before the start because of gale force winds that made the race clearly not safe for volunteers or competitors alike. Also, it had the deepest field ever in an African marathon. It had Eliud Kipchoge on the starting line, not as a competitor for the win, but as an inspirational figure for everyone. And of course, Cape Town is hoping to become a world marathon major, the first on the African continent. I don't believe that has been approved yet. We've been hearing rumors about it for several years. Now we'll see what the World Marathon Majors actually decide to do. In the race itself, 5 of the 6 podium finishers, male and female, were from Ethiopia, and I can't even attempt their names because I would just mess them up so badly. They're not known to Western followers of the marathon. They're newcomers to us. But the race was won in a very quick 2:04:55 on the men's side. And on the women's side, it went in, let me see if I can find that time. It looks like 2:23:18. So it's an undulating course. It's not flat, but it does start and finish at the same place. It's a totally legal course. And it's a race we're going to be hearing more about in the future, I'm sure. And finally, to end with Kipchoge, that 41-year-old Kenyan who has been such a story and inspiration for so many years. He did finish the race in a more than respectable 2:13:29 for 16th place. So that was the story from Cape Town, George. What have you been paying attention to?
Amby, I've been following the LA Track Fest, which took place on Saturday, May 23rd out at UCLA. And the two big, I'd say, featured events there were the two 5,000-meter events. In the women's, it took Parker Valby 19 months to run her first outdoor track race as a professional athlete. But here she was, and she finally returned, and she ran and won the 5,000. And the 23-year-old looked like the vintage Parker Valby. She surged past the pacer at about 2,200 meters and then ran the final 7 laps solo en route to a dominant win and a personal best of 14:49:41. So good for Parker Valby. I think the track fans love seeing her back. And on the men's side, in the 5,000, another big one, New Mexico's Habtom Samuel, whom we've been hearing an awful lot about in the last year or so, became the first collegiate man to break 13 minutes outdoors at 5,000 with his 12:57:22. Pretty darn impressive. And add that to what he's been doing lately. He's first been the NCAA cross-country champion and the indoor 5,000 NCAA champion. And this stellar runner from New Mexico. You know, Andy, he also, as you recall, won the Houston Half Marathon in a pretty swift 59:01. So Hampton Samuel is one of those names that we're going to keep watching. And as to people that we've got to keep an eye out, 60 Minutes a week or two ago did a feature, which you don't see very often on a runner, particularly an 18-year-old runner. His name is Gout, and he's known as Gout, and he he's an extraordinary young talent, and he's already matching and bettering the 18-year-old times of one Usain Bolt. And that, of course, gets him an awful lot of attention. And by that, I mean, Gout has run 200 meters in 1967. So he's already at the top of the world. And what a interesting story this guy has. He emigrated from South Sudan to Brisbane, Australia back in 2005. And he's, one of 7 kids. His dad runs the dishwashing operation at the local hospital. And his coach is a 61-year-old, not an experienced coach. Her name is Diane Shepherd, and she really has no formal track background. But she and he, not I, have formed some sprinting duo. She spotted him first at the Ipswich Grammar School when he was roughly in 7th grade, and she decided that this was such a huge talent. She quit her supermarket job, and she started handing out school uniforms, and she just said, "This is a guy I want to coach." And he is the real deal, Amby. So Gout is the name for people to be thinking about as we come up to World Championships and Olympics, and of course, 2032 Summer Olympics are in Brisbane when Gout will be 24 years old and running in his hometown. And you and I know 24 years old for a sprinter is pretty much a peak. It's when a sprinter often is at his very best. So pretty fascinating story.
It is such a story, George. I'm always struck these days by the number of global stars who seem to have only one name. Gout's also got only one name, but we seem to like repeating it. So we call him Gout, which is great. And on the distance scene, I've got to say, a guy like Haptum Samuel, if you're breaking 13 minutes for 5,000 and you're breaking 60 minutes for a half marathon, you're getting my attention. So I'm certainly going to be watching him in the next couple of years as we see where he goes. And that wraps it up for our review of the biggest recent news in running. Now let's turn to Jared Ward, this week's guest on Running State of the Sport. With this episode, Jared actually becomes the first runner to appear twice on our podcast.
And as you listen to this conversation, you'll quickly understand why we asked Jared to come back again. A lot's happened in his life in the last couple of years, much of it quite unusual for an elite runner, and we're eager to hear all the details. Also, he snuck back into high-level competitive racing, and we want to learn more about that.
So, Jared, welcome back to Running State of the Sport. We're really happy to have you as the two-time guest.
Well, this is quite an honor. I sort of feel like this is the, when you make an Olympic team once, you want to make a second one. When you win the Boston Marathon once, you want to win another one. I feel like I've just solidified my place in sport by being called up a second time to the podcast.
Well, thanks for that, Jack. Anyway, it's been a couple of years, so let's start by refreshing our listeners with some of the basic bio details of your life, your age, where you're living, what's your family situation, what fills the hours of a typical day for Jared Ward.
Well, Erica and I are out here living the dream in Utah, just south of Provo. We have 6 young kids, and we're doing everything from carpools to coaching soccer. And we just got back from the UK. We spent a year overseas last year and had a great time over there. So Now I'm in a world where I'm wrapping up an MBA, starting a business, and touching a few others as we sort of manage them through some transition phases. And then maybe call me crazy, but I'm contemplating tacking on a couple last years to my professional running. So we're also exploring doing this again.
Jared, I don't think we'll call you crazy. We will call you focused and smart about the way you do everything and ambitious in a lot of different areas, which is terrific. So we are going to cover a lot in this interview, but I want to start us with some of your recent racing, which came up pretty quickly on some of us. You had a great race at Cherry Blossom. Looked like maybe a PR, 46:49 for 10 miles. And then in the Pittsburgh Marathon, a month later, you were second in 2:15:02. I'm guessing you were hoping for more than that, but we'll let you tell us. Uh, what what was good and bad about those races, and where are you now?
Well, yeah, it was just kind of fun to get back into it. I don't know how many times we moved out to the UK and I thought I'm sunsetting as an athlete and this will be the beginning of the transition. But then when we moved back, like a bad habit, I jumped back in with Coach Istone and the guys here in Utah. And I was training at 60% and I started to get a little bit fit. So we increased it to maybe 80%. And so there's been a few times now where I've kind of come to Coach Istone and I said, okay, I'm going to do this race. And if A is the outcome, we're running again. And if B is the outcome, I'm retiring. And it seems like almost every time I run right in the middle of A and B. And so we're trying to figure it out. But it was, I chose the Pittsburgh Marathon for a couple reasons. I served a mission for my church out there almost 20 years ago. And so I love that city and have gone out and run the half there a few times and they do a great job. And I really like Ryan, who does the elite field out there. And so and Troy, who runs the race, it's just a great organization. And so I thought, well, I'm going to run a marathon out there and it'll be maybe a different sort of pressure experience to some of these other runs that I'm used to for marathons. And it was fantastic. After the Cherry Blossom race, where I was grateful for how fast I ran and simultaneously disappointed for my lack of a strong last mile, my hamstring flared up a little bit. And so I took the 3 weeks in between Cherry Blossom and Pittsburgh very, very easy, and then approached Pittsburgh through the lens of I just wanted to get back out here and have another race experience. And so it was probably my most controlled feeling marathon. My hamstring felt pretty good throughout, and I thought I was going to win all the way up until Will decided with about point 2 to go in the marathon that it was time to run a 29-second 200, and I wasn't quite ready for that. So
Mhm.
it was a good experience, and I would have loved to have run faster, Amby. I kind of thought, hey, the course record in Pittsburgh's 2:10 and a half, and I kind of thought, no, on the right day, that might be in the cards. And then the racing plan sort of shifted when I had felt like I needed to take care of my hamstring. So I'm hopeful I can stay healthy and hopeful I can put together a fall. And if this year goes well, then maybe we'll have another.
Very good. Well, the last time, Jared, that you were playing a big role in the marathon scene, I guess, was really going back to 2024. You were injured and you couldn't run the Olympic marathon trials, but you were certainly on site cheering for your teammates, Connor Mantz and Clayton Young, and those guys. They went 1-2 that day. And tell us a little about your feelings. Was that a bittersweet day for you? Did it make you want to just get back into marathon running right away, or did it make you begin to assess the whole arc of the many years left in your life and what you might want to do with them sort of after elite running?
The weekend had all of those feelings, George. But I would say, the feeling, you get out to a race like that and for me, it invokes a lot of memories, a lot of dear memories. So being in that atmosphere, there was sort of this feeling of, longing that I was prepared and ready to run and compete in that race. But race day, watching Clayton and Connor run the races they did and others, I'm friends with a lot of people in the field. And, being around Kylie and Ashley and Clayton and Connor's, family and extended family, it was really one of a highlight day as I contemplate some of the scenes that I've been a part of in the running world. And it helped me to realize, to empathize with why someone might choose to dedicate their life to coaching or otherwise being involved in others' successes, because it was just so rewarding, heartwarming to be on that sideline and watch those guys have such a race. You guys know this. You've been on all sides of the coin. It really is so incredibly, I think heartwarming is the word I would choose, to be watching other people have success that you feel like you've been a small part of.
I remember seeing you and Ed particularly that day, and the two of you were happier than the first and second place finishers. I think you guys were. It couldn't have been better. I mean, it was a Hollywood script finish to that race. So, Jared, I guess I've always had an inkling that you were interested in business, and I remember your big appearance on Shark Tank. But I wasn't prepared for you moving the entire family to Oxford, England, like you'd never heard of Stanford or Harvard or a few other business schools, Penn or whatever. How did you and Erica reach the decision that that's what you wanted to do and take the whole family with you?
Oh, man. Well, you know what, Amby, we just had this itch for a family experience, and that really stemmed all the way back from when I was finishing up at BYU, getting ready to apply to PhD programs. And Erica was really the force behind the decision to run. And she just kept saying, Jared, I really think you should just take a year. You don't have to, commit to running for forever. Just take a year and do this before you apply to these programs. And so we took a year as I was sort of finishing up school without applying to programs, and thought, okay, we'll take sort of a year off. And then, three-quarters of the way through that year off, I made an Olympic team, and I never hit send on that application to school. And so, it was this 10-year career, 10 plus years of running started because Erica said, we need to do this. Despite my hesitations that, we have two young kids, and, there's times to play and there's times to be responsible. And so it was her that really got us doing this. But we both thought someday we'll go apply to somewhere on the East Coast and we'll move out there. But then the running career lasted longer than I think either of us could have imagined. And so now we got 6 kids, and we're sunsetting and contemplating, okay, what does now the next phase look like? And it didn't seem like life has oriented us towards maybe the level of academic rigor that would merit going and pursuing a PhD, or that we're in the sort of life place to move our family for 4 or 5 years and pursue these dreams. But we thought maybe an MBA was accretive to what we were doing, and then the timeline sort of works, and we could do 1 or 2 years. And it just seemed really fun to do it over in the UK. And so that was really the motivation. I called up Shaquille Walker, a friend of mine that ran at BYU, who just finished an MBA at Harvard, and was chatting with him about Harvard, because Amby, I have heard of those schools. And he
Really?
and Shaq said, "Hey, have you considered Oxford?" And I said, "No, should I?" And he said, "Well, I would." And that was the start.
So, Jared, tell us briefly about that program at Oxford, and mainly, the amount of concentrated work it took on your part. What surprised you about living in England and Oxford?
Well, it was just really culturally expanding for our whole family. Oxford is, to those of us with an American perspective and background, it just felt like the quintessential England. The buildings are 1,000 years old. The culture is proper and organized. It was just really fun to be a part of. When I think of this experience, now there's the school component and it's fantastic, but the most heartwarming aspects are, my 6-year-old coming home from her first day of the equivalent of kindergarten in the UK, and she just has this proper English accent. Watching our kids play with their friends and just sort of integrate into this culture. Kids are so incredibly resilient and adaptive, and that was the best part. And the education's great. I'm in a cohort of about 60 individuals from 40 countries across the world, and we have everyone from consulting and real estate to heart surgeons and diplomats. And it really is just an incredible group of people, and the conversations are rich and rewarding, and I've loved it. And I finish in September, so I have about 3 more 1-week trips in between now and then to wrap up my degree. And I love going back every time. But when we reflect back on Oxford, when Erica and I reflect back, I think it'll be a little less the educational component and a little bit more the family component and even the church component. We made some great friends out there through faith as well. And we traveled. We took what our kids called the Big Red Rust Bucket, which was this massive van that we purchased, and we took it across the channel and we drove a loop around the Alps over the course of about a month while we were there.
Oh.
And we just did all these experiences that were really incredible for our family, and I wouldn't trade it.
Ed, I'm thinking you could add travel agent to your line of business ventures and sell Oxford, which I was lucky enough to visit briefly long ago. So you keep using the word sunsetting, but even at Oxford, if I'm right, you were still running, because I've seen these internet articles about you running on the cross country team for a couple of years. How much running were you doing while you were over there? And tell us some great stories about how British cross country is different than American.
Did either of you ever run British cross country?
I ran Wimbledon Common once. It was fantastic.
I've never run it, but I've certainly been to a World Cross Country Championship in.
It's a different world over there. I would show up to races and the guys would be like, "Oh, this course is flat and fast. It'll be just like American cross country, Jared. This isn't even English cross country." And I would show up and think, in America, we run on fairways. This isn't American cross country still, even the nicest courses they could drop. But it was just so fun. It's different. It's a different style. The running, cross country running is just, if you take everything that American cross country is here in terms of grittiness and just raw competition, and then you take it over there and it's just another level of that. We would run through streams. You would be on all fours going up a mud bank, even though you have 3/4 inch spikes in your shoes, hopping over logs and choosing your own line through the middle. It's like cross country. It's where cross country meets mountain running at this really wet intersection of what the UK has to offer in the winter. But it was amazing, and I had no idea when I went over there that I'd be a part of this. I showed up and I went out to go on a run with the cross country guys, the lads, and said, "Hey, I'm going to be here for a year. Can I just, can I jump in with you?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, of course." And then, one of the guys was like, "Well, are you going to run with us? Are you going to race with us?" And I said, "Oh, I can't race. I've already run in college." And they said, "Oh, that doesn't matter." And I said, "Well, I've already been professional.
To the Olympics.
I don't have any amateur status." And they said, "It doesn't matter." And I said, "I'm 36 years old." And they go, "It doesn't matter." And so I ran cross country, and I participated in the second oldest cross country race in the world, the Oxford versus Cambridge dual meet. And I participated in British Athletics cross country championships, the equivalent of the NCAA, twice. And I ran varsity track, and I just had such a great time running with these guys. And I think that helped to relight the love of the sport. And it wasn't that I had fallen out of my love of running, but I just suffered. I felt like on the injuries, I was just, I'd get a hamstring injury, and then I'd work through it, and then I'd start to get fit again, and then I'd start to hope again, and then I'd get ready to race, and I'd get another injury, and then we'd start over. And that hope cycle really was hard on me in 2023 and 2024. And I think that was sort of what pushed me over the edge and said, you know what, I just can't keep going all in on this with all the hope and then just have it end in another injury. But over in the UK, I trained at 30 or 40%. I showed up to, work out once a week, and I had so much fun with it. And it just made me realize that I could stay healthy. I just had to be thoughtful about how I do it. And I don't know how hard I'm going to be able to train. I don't know where that line is yet. It seems like with the hamstring injury kind of flaring up again, at least before Pittsburgh, I'm flirting with it. But I just realized I don't have to train like I used to or not train at all. I can meet the sport where I'm at and have fun with it. We'll see if that puts me on the start line at the Olympic trials or where that lines me up relative to guys that I used to be able to keep up with, but I'm going to have fun with it. And so my paradigm has shifted a little bit.
I want to get on to your businesses, but I got one quick follow-up here, Jared. How well did a 36-year-old do in the Oxford-Cambridge cross-country meet?
Somewhere up here on this desk, I have a little cup that I guess says that it went all right.
Nice.
We had, when I was first got to Oxford and we were training for this race that's in December, and this is to the guys at Oxford, this this varsity race with Cambridge is every bit as big of a deal as the cross country championships at the end of the season. And some of the guys on the team had been on the team for 6 years and hadn't beat Cambridge. Cambridge was on quite a run. And so the hope was that this year we could beat Cambridge. And we went in with a great strategy. Matt Seddon coaches the Oxford guys, and he has a brother that ran for Florida and was an Olympic steeplechaser. But Matt Seddon is an incredible coach over there. And he drew up a plan for race day, and we executed it right on plan. And I ended up winning the race. But not only that, Oxford swept it. And we went 1 through 6, and Perfect scored the meet, and it was one of the greatest finishes that the club has had in the 150-year-old history. So it was quite a day, George.
Very cool, very cool. And we'll come back to some running, but I do want to get into the business world because you've been involved in a number of businesses. I think one a real estate business, perhaps with some family members. You've had that big success on Shark Tank with the Milestone massage unit, and you'll tell us what's happened to that. You're still working with Saucony on running shoe development. We've got to get into that. And there's just a lot to discuss. So, update us on all of the business side of your life.
Well, yeah, I'm going to have to organize, at some point I'm going to have to get myself some systems to hold these things because it's there's a little bit of juggling. But I have such incredible people that I work with. And so much of the business that I do, particularly on the real estate side, I work with my brothers who are both finance guys, and they're just a brilliant team. They're both younger than me, but the middle brother is just such an incredible visionary. He comes from an experience in investment banking and then private equity and then mergers and acquisitions. And he just is such a visionary. And then my other brother, who's younger than him, proved an incredible operator. And he's just this hard worker, level-headed runner. He's going to run a 100-mile race this summer, actually, though. So it's making me question whether he's got all of his wires on straight. He thinks that's pretty fun. But he's just an incredible operator. And so I get to sort of be attached to some of the stuff that they're doing, and they do a great job. The Milestorm is still out there, and it's still going. We get a little bump every time Shark Tank re-airs our episode, so that we're grateful to still be on ABC's cycle there. And then and then the rest has just been an extension of that. I still am involved in motivational speaking and trying to put together thoughts. If I can put together thoughts half as well as the two of you can, then someday I'll churn out a book and convince somebody to read it. But I've been working on that in the background, and then with a buddy of mine here and the marketing professor that I had in Oxford and some sports nutrition researchers at BYU, I'm going to launch a nutrition company this summer, sports nutrition, that I'm quite excited about. And so that's kind of been commanding some of the thought process now, and then just wrapping up school.
I'm excited to hear about the nutrition company because we're going to get to some of the crazy and perhaps useful nutrition supplements that a lot of runners seem to be playing with these days shortly. But, since you left to concentrate on Oxford, since you left BYU, the program hasn't been standing still. In fact, Connor and Clayton keep getting faster, and there are new faces showing up who some of them in workouts are only a couple of strides back, and I know they're going to make breakthroughs soon. So what's the secret sauce out there at BYU? Of course, Ed was a multi-time Olympian, and you as well, but even deeper than that, what's going on out in Utah and BYU that's got a lot of people running strong?
Well, the culture out here is, I think, to credit for that. And culture can be such a powerful thing. And And certainly there's artists of the culture behind the culture. And I think some of them that you can see and some that you can't see. Um, Ed is certainly one of those. Like when we get together with guys that ran for Coach Icestone at BYU, sometimes someone will ask that question, what's Ed's secret sauce? Why does this work? And it almost invokes, before we sit back and think about it, it just invokes a laugh. Coach Icestone, we call him Easy E. He, he shows up to workouts, and if he might give you a time, he might not give you a time. If he gives you a time and you run fast, he says, "Hey, nice job." And if he gives you a time and you run slow, he says, "Hey, nice job." And he really is he's ever supportive. He's so just practical and level-headed in his advice. He doesn't there's no element of his coaching that is, this is my way and we're going to do it like this. It's collaborative. I remember asking him a question when I was a sophomore on the team and I was finally old enough and I was running high enough volume that I was contemplating running doubles. And I was trying to get some advice from coach on where I should plug these doubles. And he gave me his advice. And then he said, "That's my 2 cents. You choose where to put them." And that's really, and I think, but what it results in when you have someone who's there to nudge you in the right direction and then to endlessly cheer for you and champion you, and then to let you develop within your own system of what works for you, there's so much richness that comes out of that. One of the things you get is I result in having the Jared Ward system, which is a little different than the Connor Mantz system, which is different from the Clayton Young system. And it's all built from sort of the same system, but there's so much room in there to experiment with what works exactly right for me that I'm able to sort of find it. But I'm able to find it in this framework where someone is there almost like bumpers on a bowling alley to say, well, maybe let's not do 20 miles the Saturday before your next race. Maybe let's just rein it in a little bit, and just to kind of bump us in the right direction and to be a positive sounding board. And then he's just always there to cheer and to celebrate. And I feel like Coach Icestone is right there with his arms around you after the bad days. And on the good days, he's sort of fading into the crowd, unless you want him or you need him. To me, it's never felt like it's the Ed Icestone show. And I felt like sometimes I want to pull him up on the stage next to me and say, "Hey, this is Coach Ed Icestone, and he's orchestrated this." But he would say, "This is Jared. I just get to be along for the ride." And so I think he's very meek and he's always there and he's willing, but he creates this culture, and then he creates leaders, because instead of stepping in on his team and saying, "Okay, this is how the show runs. This is the captain. This is the schedule. This is what we're doing," he says, "Okay, team, who do you want to be the leaders?" And then he says, "Okay, leaders, what do you want to do?" And he just gives room for culture to perpetuate and to develop and to change and to morph and to grow. So anyway, so there's a lot of good that Ed's doing, and there's a lot of good that's happening at the high school level and with other college coaches, and Coach Taylor's doing a great job in this ecosystem that I think is just feeding this culture. And if you show up for a long run up here, then Connor and Clayton will show up, and maybe 100 other people, and it's inclusive and it's fun and it's aspirational, and it's really kind of a special thing going on.
When you talk about Ed, I mean, what a description of a role model for leadership that was. I mean, it was just fascinating to listen to. You've got a pro team called the Run Elite Team. It's not got a shoe sponsor or any other apparent major sponsor. Is that a goal, finding an appropriate major sponsor? What are the challenges or things, are they just fine going along the way they are?
Well, we talked about, sort of a pro club in Utah for maybe the last 15 years. And I've kind of hit this idea off a number of people. I remember days where Miles Batty was talking about it. And I've certainly had conversations with Coach Ryan Waite, who's coaching with Ed Icestone now. And then Isaac Wood and I had talked about this. And there was just one day when Isaac Wood called me up and he said, "Hey, I wonder if we can do it like this. This is a different model. It'd be a little disruptive maybe, or it won't work. But what if we do this without a title sponsor? And the club is a little bit more agnostic. And in that way, we can sort of unify a club across sponsors. And how does this model, how could it look? And so we got kind of working on this model, and then we pushed the model past one of our state senators here in Utah, who works with the sports commission, and he just said, hey, this is incredible. Utah's running really well from the high school level and all the way through the college level. Let's see what we could do from a state's perspective. And so we reoriented things a little bit to look at what's the state's objective when it looks at what a program like this could do. And the state looks at education, and they look at health and wellness of youth all the way up through health and wellness of everyone in our communities. They look at economic impact and how can we bring events, and Utah in particular is really, pushing for this, stuff like 2034 Olympics, and, Ryan Smith bringing a pro hockey team in, and everything from tennis to skateboarding to climbing, Team USA climbing. And so Utah's trying to bring this here and try to create this impact, but they're also just caring about what sport does in the community. And so we positioned Run Elite program partially around what the state aims are in things that we could be accretive to. And we said, well, what if we take pro runners and we have pro runners go speak in schools and inspire health and wellness and perpetuate the sport from the top of funnel? And then we can pay the pros to do this. And then it's not built on a sponsorship model, it's built on a community model. And then we get people in our community together. I was running this morning and I ran past Corey Lindley. He was in the doTERRA family and worked here for a while. And the Lindleys and so many other families like this come out to events in Utah when we say, hey, we're doing something with these runners. We want the community to be a part of it. And we're fundraising for these purposes to expand the sport in these ways. And the community has come together. And so we're now expanding to partnerships for events and partnerships, trying to enable partnerships for directly with athletes, but we're trying to, at the brand level, stay quite agnostic. I mean, we do have a big partnership with Intermountain Healthcare, which is a local healthcare across the region, even a little beyond Utah. And, the athletes have PT and doctor support and money for MRIs and things like this through this medical network. But at the highest partnership level, that's the only partner we have. And we've just looked to see how we can maintain this level of agnosticity so that we can be inclusive, but then and diversify these athletes' revenue streams. We don't want someone to have to say, oh, I'm with this shoe company, but I got to leave it and join this group. We want to be accretive to these revenue streams. And so, we're still young. We'll see if the model works, but we're hopeful.
It sounds like a great way to go to me, Jared. And I just wrote down, you're not only the first guy to come back on this show twice, but you're also the first person to say agnosticity on this podcast.
Is that a word?
But it certainly translated just
it.
fine. Just fine. So, we live in a marathon world now where you wake up on a Sunday morning and one day somebody has run a 1:59:30. It turns out the same day, somebody you probably never heard of, running his first road race of note, runs a 2:05. I mean, what is going on out there? First, more specifically, did sub 2 surprise you, or did you think Sawe was working towards that?
So yeah, I thought he was working towards it. Him and others,
Yeah.
and I got to think that, I had a few conversations since this where people say, oh, is this the new world record for a while? Is it going to continue to go up? And I say, I don't think so. I think there's probably 20 athletes out there that watched what happened in London and are thinking, I can break 2. There's culture's a funny thing. And, for those dialed into the history of the 4-minute mile, culture is pretty powerful with these barriers. And I think sometimes the culture is more powerful than the technology. And I've actually wondered if shoe technology is better than we have yet to realize, because as good as the physical technology is, we're still competing against psychological barriers at the same time. And I think that the shoe technology has continued to improve since it rolled out. What we call super shoes rolled out almost 10 years ago. And so, no, I think it's going to keep on rolling. I wasn't watching London thinking today's the day, nor do I feel like I was particularly surprised, but I was quite excited. It's fun to watch these things happen and fun to be a part of a sport through these times when there's so much attention and excitement. And And I think it'll make it gives everybody something to market around and to watch for the next few years, because now every time the weather's good and the field's good, we can turn on the race and we can watch with wonder and anticipation.
So, what
Yeah, I
did
think so.
Connor and Clayton think when they woke up and someone told them a guy they'd never heard of had just run 2:05?
I you know I was running with Clayton this morning, and I still haven't talked with him about Vinny yet. Yeah, what an incredible thing, and it just represents so much that's changed. I think we're seeing a lot of things change, but one of them that affects how much talent we have at the top level is how long someone is now able to be a professional marathon runner. If we rewind the clock even 10 years, and certainly if we rewind it a few decades, it takes years to become a marathon runner. I felt like 15 years ago when someone debuted in the marathon, you could almost discount their time 6 or 8 minutes, and you could say, you know what, if they train for 4 years and improve and hit their peak as a marathoner, they might be able to run 6 or 8 minutes faster than they ran today, just because that's how long it took to sort of stress test and acclimate the body to that type of training. And now super shoes let you take an engine that's proved really fast on the track and put them on the road, and they can be almost instant offense. And so what used to be peak of your career marathoning days from age, call it 30 to 35, we now can maybe be at a peak from age 23 to 40, because the super shoes are helping us on both sides of this timeline. And so what you end up with is, instead of 3 people or a handful or whatever that are at the peak of US marathoning that fit right within this 5-year window, well, now we're looking at a 15-year window or a 20-year window. And I think what we're going to see is double or triple or quadruple the number of names that fit sort of in this space, because these careers are just going to last for so long.
It's hard to believe, Jared, that Kajelka has just run his best marathon, his first one after. You're right. It doesn't usually happen on your debut, and you got to believe there's, more to come from him among these other elites that you're talking about. You've talked about the super shoes a little here, and you're a real student and statistician of the sport. So let's get into some of the other things, the optimal carb fueling, which we hear a lot of talk about, caffeine, sodium bicarbonate. I can just throw it all out there, broccoli sprouts, even beet juice, and even the placebo effect of just taking a dozen different supplements and all of it. So, and you even mentioned the cultural effect, the Roger Bannister effect, knowing someone's done it, and very quickly there's a John Landy and others are doing it, even though it hadn't been done for forever up until then. It all became possible because people looked around and saw it was possible. So what are all the other factors? I mean, clearly we're seeing incredible performances in the marathon.
Well, yeah, there's so many factors, and I think this is sport, and this is how it grows. I'm reading a book right now on Gatorade, and it's funny to think that if you rewind the clock, not that many decades, we're talking about sorting out what electrolytes are affecting performance, and how to rehydrate, and how if we add glucose to water, then our body absorbs it faster. And this wasn't that long ago that this is what we're talking about with sports nutrition. And now scientists are extracting micronutrients from various plants, and looking at how this is affecting life at a cellular level. And there's just so much there's so much that's happening from that standpoint. But I do think that, I guess I'm blue collar still in some of my approaches, but that one of the things I like that you said, George, is just sort of this placebo effect, and it gives you something to focus on. And I just think it can be so productive. I mean, it can be destructive too, but it can be so productive to just have things to focus on, somewhere to channel your energy. And when you can finish a run and then start to think about, what you can do to still be productive. You can only run a couple hours a day or a few hours a day, but what else can you do to be productive, to improve performance? And I think sometimes these other mediums give you something to channel that energy into. And when I've thought about this is my motivation for a nutrition company, and we will launch something that initially that's I think quite novel. But at a higher level, I want sports nutrition to nudge um, behavior. I think too often we approach, a workout and say, okay, now I just ran 5 by mile repeat, the best I've ever run it before. I'm getting so fit. To which I would respond, yeah, but now you're so broken because you just ran the best workout of your life. Now is the time when your body gets to adapt. Now you get to go home and you get to fuel, you get to rest, you get to choose to a certain extent how much effort you put into turning that stimulus into an adaptation. And I think we've moved towards that. And I think people, I think scientists are thinking about this. How can we create these stimulus and translate them into performance? But I don't know that consumers are thinking about this at this level yet. And I really want nutrition and sports nutrition to nudge behavior that sort of suggests this idea that I continue training when the run ends. And in fact, maybe that's really when some important aspects of training start. And I do think that sometimes having so much to think about gives you different ways to channel that energy productively.
Jared, I'm so interested in this big question that George asked you. I'm not going to let you get off without answering at least one part of it for me. And it's really not fair for us to pretend like you're the all-knowing expert, because you follow the sport as closer than anyone, but that doesn't mean you know what everybody's drinking before or during the races. But what is the deal with sodium bicarbonate? The scientists all say it's good for 10 or 15 minutes. But my impression is the marathoners are all taking it now and running 1:59. What do you hear? Who do you know? Not who
Yeah.
do you know, but do you know marathoners who are taking it and are convinced it's helping them?
Yeah, I think so. And I actually wonder if some of that research, well, at least observationally with some good theories are sort of trickling into as to why it might help in a marathon. I do think you're right. I think it's clear that there are some events that stand to benefit from lowering blood lactate levels, maybe more than a marathon, and an event that's supposed to be run at a sustainable lactate threshold, and that lactate is a fuel source too. So, we don't want to rob the body of a fuel source. But I do think it seems that there is maybe some benefit. And, from my perspective, it looks like it lasts maybe in the system long enough that if there's a benefit to this aerobic running in addition to anaerobic, that it might be there long enough to help you in the marathon when you need it. So I didn't take it before my last marathon, but I packed it in my bag to the start line because I had contemplated it.
So you've tried it in training, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I've tried it in training, and I think I want to say I took it in Berlin for the marathon in 2023.
Mm.
It's probably the only marathon that I've taken it for, and I talked to the Martin guys there too, and I just said exactly what you said. I said, you're here at the marathon giving out bicarb. Why? Does it work? And he goes, well, we're not sure. In fact, we tend to maybe at this point be quite unsure if it would help you in the marathon at all. But we have a number of runners that really think it's helping them in the marathon. So we're here and we have it and they can take it. And that was sort of their approach. And I think that's pivoted a little bit. I think from a marketing standpoint, they've found a few points to get behind as why this might help you in a marathon. But I actually, Ambi, I think the science might catch up to this because my observation is that people are doing it and believing that it's helping.
So while I've got you on the question, I'm going to add it back to the mile. Do you think bicarb is one reason everybody can run a sub 350 mile now?
I think bicarb's helping. I think shoes are helping more.
Yeah. And then, we've always got to revisit the whole doping question. There's been another major Kenyan athlete just recently, Kibawat Kandi, the first runner who ever broke 58 minutes in the half marathon, is apparently now facing major doping allegations. Comments on that one.
Well, it's sad, and it maybe I'm just a big softy, but it still is a blow to my heart every time these come out. But I will say that the thing that makes me smile is how confident I am that these people that are training around me are doing things the right way. And so when I watch Connor run 2:04, and when I watch Clayton run 2:05, I swell with this pride and sort of this sense of gratitude for just reminding me that high performance is possible doing it the right way. And so I think sometimes the thing that's so hard for me when the world's best test positive is two things. One is I think I'm an optimist, but I have some grounded data realism in me, and I recognize from a statistical perspective that if people out there are cheating, and if somebody breaks a record and they're the fastest person ever, that there's a statistical likelihood that has just gone up that observation comes from a distribution that's cheating, and I know that, but I still don't want to believe it. I still want to believe that these heroes and these pioneers are doing things the way that I want to be doing things and the way that I want to encourage others to do things, and that being the best is possible, doing things the right way. And Clayton or Connor, athletes like this go out and do something incredible. I think, all right, you can do things the right way and you can still do very, very well. And that kind of regrounds me back in the reality that I'm going to live in and that I'm going to propagate and push people to live in. And, and just hope that we can kind of drive out the bad by just focusing on the good.
So, Jared, we really appreciate your optimistic realism, if we can call it that, and particularly the example, Ed, you and all of your training partners are setting for the wider population out there. We're reaching the end now. As you know, I think we've got two typical questions at the end of each podcast. The first is, what do you think about the state of the sport of marathoning right now? What's really, really good? Do you see anything that could use improving?
Well, I think I'm excited about it. I think the sport's growing. I think health and wellness in the running space is growing, and I think people are, I think even the professionalism of the sport is growing, and so I'm fairly optimistic about it. One thing that I'd like to see change, we're living in systems that are from in the professional running world, and this is one thing I was talking with Clayton about this morning. That the systems are older systems. The way that agents operate, the way that races operate from a professional athlete standpoint, even the way that sponsorships, title sponsors, these things, and the governance over it, the USA Track and Field and the USOPC and the international governing bodies, these things are anchored in older systems that stemmed from amateur athletics and pre sort of digital information era. And one thing that I really would like to see, Amby, is movement into systems that leverage these current things that are at our fingertips that could enhance the impact that the professional athletes and aspect of the sport could have on the industry. And I say that very broadly, but I just think, there's so many things when I think about the sport that could change if some of these age-old systems were willing to loosen the grips just a little bit. And I think the sport could. I think people are interested in the sport, and I think we live in an era now where everybody on the start line in the Boston Marathon could know who the pros are on the start line and care, and everyone on the start line in the New York Marathon could know and could care. And if we leaned into that, I think it could be really accretive to the sport from a professionalism standpoint, but I think it could present a win-win across the industry, including for the consumers.
I sure agree with that one, Jared. And our second question is, we give you 3 fairy godmother wishes, and they can be for yourself, your family, your friends, whatever situations you spend a lot of time thinking about. What would you like to see come true in the near future or even the next few years? It's open.
Well, you're gonna waive my first wish on back on the podcast for a third time in 2 or 3 or 4 years. Okay, so we're gonna put that one down.
That's done.
I spend so much time these days thinking about my kids and how much I want for them. And so I think my second wish would be that I could have the presence of mind, the awareness, the inspiration to not miss those moments now, that I can have positive impacts on their life and their trajectory. I don't want to miss those. So I think that would be the next one. And then as we exit this phase of having kids, I'm married to someone that I still love very deeply, that I married in high school, or not married in high school, but I met in high school. We married much after high school, but I met in high school and on the track team, and I think the world of Erica, and she has been a mother for most of our marriage, and most of that mothering has been either pregnant or nursing. And we're now past the phase of having more kids. And I think my third wish goes to her as she navigates what her life transitions to, as her role as a mother doesn't shift maybe away from being a mother, but shifts in what that looks like, and sort of where she's headed. So the last one goes to Erica and her indoor soccer league, and whatever else she decides comes next.
Well, she has obviously been a huge foundational piece in all aspects of your life, running and kids and getting MBAs. So we certainly hope for that. I'm hoping for you a healthy hamstring and one or two more really strong marathons in the next couple of year period. So that's it for our podcast with marathon star and business world star, Jared Ward.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thanks so much for having me. I love chatting with you guys. This is a rich opportunity for me, and
Well,
hope the best.
thank you, Jared. And let me guarantee you on your first wish, getting back here for a third time with your full and fascinating life. We'll guarantee that we'll have you back for sure.
Well, we'll see you soon then.
Amby, that was a great conversation we just had with Jared Ward, the first two-time guest at Running State of the Sport. He certainly wears many hats and seems to excel at everything he does. What did you think about our chat with Jared?
Well, of course, it was exciting to have him back. He's been a friend for quite a while, and I'm so impressed by him. This time I had two main takeaways, I think. First, I was really excited and appreciative of the fact that he took his whole family, his wife and no less than six kids, with him to Oxford, England, where he was studying for his degree in executive business administration. I just think it's so great that he wanted to have them have a big experience as well as the educational one that he got. It was clearly part of the plan when he and his wife, Erica, were discussing the plan. They pulled it off, and I think it's giving every member of that family an advanced degree. The second piece, I had to fact check to make sure that he was right and I was right in hearing it. And my fact check came out, yes, that's the way it works. I'm talking now about the Run Elite program that they have in Utah for the top runners out there. And that is a public-private funded nonprofit. It's not just something that's getting tons of money from one shoe company. In fact, they've gone a different direction. They actually receive almost $200,000 a year from the state of Utah, the public coffers. That means that anytime one of the pro runners goes out on a public speaking appearance to the community, a high school, any community group out in Utah, the runners can get paid for their appearances, which is great. And of course, the audience gets to hear a message from some of the top young people in Utah. So I think that's a terrific way to run an elite running program, just the way they're doing it in Utah. George, what impressed you most about our interview with Jared?
Yeah, Amby, as with you, I think he's one of the smartest, most thoughtful people in the running community. And he's been, who really, when you think about it, has been better at sort of balancing his elite athletic performances with his career transition that's just, evolving now. He uses the term sunsetting to describe his transition away from being a full-time professional athlete, yet he still is highly engaged in competition, as we talked about. And I think Jared Amby is always going to be a leader in our sport. I love the way he talked about collaborative leadership and team culture and, that ecosystem that they've developed at the BYU under Ed Eyestone. He described how it's quite decentralized and it's a coaching style that eschews a rigid one-size-fits-all framework. Instead, Ed Eyestone empowers these athletes as individuals to develop their own unique systems with a supportive, inclusive community. And it just strikes me that Jared is giving us all some very good lessons in leadership there.
Thanks for those thoughts, George. It is true. Jared does like to say sunsetting when he's talking about himself, but I have the feeling he's got so many projects in his head and on his development board that he's going to be around and in the sport for a long time. And I certainly hope so, because he's an entirely positive influence on the sport. So that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.